Hello and welcome to the EmPower Hour hosted by Fasig Brooks. My name is Kimmy Hogan. I'm taking over the hosting duties for Dana Brooks today, and we have an awesome episode with adoption attorney Madonna Finney and our very own Brittany Waldo, who is a adoptive parent. And so we're very excited to have this topic, especially because it is National Adoption Month. First, I'd like to go around and introduce our panel and then introduce you all to our special guests. So we have Miss Rose Caswick, the purveyor of drinks. Hey, Rose.
Yes, hi. Today
Thank you,
I'm
Rose.
thinking cold thoughts. It was cold earlier in the week. It's 70 dang degrees now, but we're having hot apple cider with a fireball in it for feeling fallish anyway. So
I love it. It's delicious. And hey, Takia Thomas.
Hi, guys.
Next, I'll introduce our very own Brittany Waldo. She is a superstar paralegal. She works with attorney Carrie Roan. Hey, Brittany.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us today. Did you bring us a picture of your son, Miles, so you can show everybody the cuteness?
I've got a million pictures of them. Let's see.
Imagine that.
Right?
So Brittany prints off pictures of Miles and puts them on Carrie's door with funny signs about how you're not allowed to disturb Carrie during depositions.
not disturb, stank face.
Here's the school photo.
He's so cute.
Precious.
And then, of course, our wonderful guest, Madonna Finney. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to read a little bit of a bio for you. Madonna is a graduate of the University of Florida College of Law. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
That's right.
Rose and I both went to UF as well.
Oh, all right.
She is one of 28 Florida lawyers that are board certified in adoption law and the only one in the Panhandle. Wow, that's not a lot of people to be board certified in an area.
It is not. We are the smallest legal specialty.
Wow, that's awesome. And then she is a fellow of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys and the founding director and legislative chair of the Florida Adoption Council. And she has been in a private adoption focused practice in Tallahassee for 24 years. That is just awesome.
Wow.
And Madonna
Doesn't seem that long.
Oh, flying by, I'm sure. Madonna was telling me before we started that she has offices in Pensacola, Tallahassee, and Franklin County.
That's right.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
I know that in getting ready for today's show, I was thinking I have all of the questions about adoption because I just don't know very much about it. So I'd love to kick us off with having you, Madonna, give us kind of an overview of the adoption process for somebody who's wanting to adopt, and then give us also some information about if you are wanting to put your child up for adoption, where you can go to find information about that.
So sure, let's start with those people who are interested in adopting. And in Florida, we have a private adoption process. You can adopt from an agency or a lawyer. But you can also adopt from the state of Florida. We have foster care adoptions. And in fact, this weekend, I'm hosting an event for Heart Gallery of the Big Bend to help promote our foster children who are available for adoption in this area. If you adopt from the state of Florida, there's no cost to you. And in fact, you can be eligible to receive subsidy, either one-time subsidy payment or recurring subsidy for your child. And so for a lot of people, especially people who maybe aren't necessarily looking for a newborn baby to bring home right from the hospital, there are certainly many children just waiting for an adopted family. So if you feel that calling, if you have room in your heart for one more and room in your home for one more, there are many children. You can look at the Heart Gallery of the Big Bend. They have a Facebook page, they have a website, they have Instagram. You can go on there and look at the children that are available. And if you're interested in exploring that, you would kind of go through a process where you have to have a home study. You would have to find an identified child. So you would work with a caseworker in the state system to identify a particular child or sibling group, because we have a lot of sibling groups that are looking for a home. And typically we try to place sibling groups together in the state of Florida. That's a priority. Sometimes it's not possible, but it's a goal to keep these children together. And then in Florida, we also have what I'll call private adoption, which is basically coming to a lawyer like myself or an adoption agency to adopt a child. And in some respects, the process is similar. You still have to have a home study. So that would involve either an adoption agency or a licensed mental health professional coming to your home, helping educate you on the process of adoption, answering questions, also looking at your physical home, making sure you have a safe home, doing criminal background checks. You know, we don't want to place children in an unsafe environment. So just checking the family out, all the adults who are residing in that home. So in both ways to adopt, both the public sector and in private adoption, you've got to go through a home study process. And once you complete that, then you are eligible to be an adoptive parent. In the private sector, usually you work with an adoption professional like a lawyer or an agency representative to kind of identify what are the types of children and situations that you're looking for. And that can be anything from what race of a child, what gender of a child, what types of situations, like what if the child has a minor or major medical issue, or what if there was alcohol or tobacco or drug use during pregnancy. And something to keep in mind is that really, I think there is a family out there for every single child. You just have to find the right match, the right child for the right family. So I've placed children, even infants who have Down syndrome. I've had no problem placing them for adoption. So really there are fabulous adoptive homes out there for all kinds of children. I think the issue is really kind of matching them up.
So Madonna, I was thinking about how you've been in practice for 24 years. So you would have been practicing before everybody was online doing social media and being very connected on the internet. Was placing people and matching kids to families a lot different back when you first started?
I would say that it's really changed over that time, and absolutely the internet, Facebook, social media groups has really come into play. I would say there are some very positive aspects. There are probably a few negative aspects, aren't there with everything, but really I think it's helped to kind of put information out there. People can now more easily access information about adoption, about children available for adoption, about things like what do I do if I adopt a child who's of a race other than myself? What do I do if I adopt an older child that maybe has lived in foster homes before they came to me? There are support groups. There are social media influencers out there. There are podcasts. There are all types of things that really weren't available. I mean, even in the last 10 years, it's changed dramatically.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, let me throw it over to Kia. Kia, what are you thinking?
A lot, because we know how great Brittney is with her son. And I kind of wanted to go into how was that process for you, Brittney, especially utilizing such an expert in the field, I'm pretty sure it was seamless, but it still was probably some challenges out there. So I just wanted to know, how was that process in the very beginning?
It was stressful. There's a lot that you have to do. What led me there, I had my infertility stuff, and talked to my friend Angela, who's a social worker, and she's adopted her son, and she has 2 biological children. And she's like, well, we need to get you a home study first. And I mean, there are so many different types of background checks you have to get. I swear, like, my fingerprints went off to like a million different people. Then you have to go to the doctor and get a letter from your doctor saying that you're in good health. You have to get a letter from your employer saying that your job is secure, proof of health insurance, letters of reference. And then the social worker comes to your home and looks at your home. And there was Angela's husband's a firefighter. And so we had 2 smoke detectors in our house, one upstairs, one downstairs. It wasn't a huge house, and we thought that was plenty. By the end of the home study, we had 11 in our 1,400 square foot house.
You were going to get approved.
So that was an expensive trip to Lowe's.
Wow.
And then, so after you get all that done, then you create your profile, which is what the birth parents see when they're selecting a family. And then you just kind of wait to get matched. And you only get presented to families that meet your, I guess, criteria. Stuart and I really didn't have, we were like any sex up to 4, any race, that we didn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
So we matched fairly quickly. But I know that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Brittany, would you talk a little bit about, because you had an initial match, right, that ended up not going through?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Matched initially with a woman, and she, I guess, Madonna, in Florida, they can't sign the consent until 2 days after birth, right?
Right. So in Florida, there is what's called a 48-hour waiting period after birth for a newborn child. And unless you receive a written medical discharge prior to that 48-hour period, you have to wait that time.
And so, yeah, the initial mother that we matched with changed her mind. But and then Angela contacted me, I think, a few weeks later and said, I know this is still fresh, but there's this family, I think you'd love them. Do you want to be presented? And Stuart and I talked, and we did, and we got Miles. And his birth mother is just amazing, absolutely amazing. Her water broke 4 weeks early, so they tried to keep Miles inside as long as possible. And so we actually got to spend a whole weekend at the hospital with her, because she asked for us to be there. She ended up having to get a C-section Monday morning, and she asked me to be the one in the OR with her. It was just, I'm gonna like cry. It was really amazing. And we have still kept in touch with her. I text her a few times every week. She was at his baptism. Then COVID happened, so stuff kind of, in-person stuff kind of stopped, but he's going to have something coming up in May, and she's going to come to that. And she's the most amazing woman in the world.
I love it. And so, Madonna, will you talk a little bit about how parents can choose to have it? Is it an open relationship or a closed adoption? What are the terms and what's that all about?
Sure. So I like to think of openness in an adoption as a spectrum, going from one extreme to the other. One being a totally closed adoption, which would kind of be typically the old-fashioned, type of adoption that we think of. My father did adoptions as his pro bono work when I was a little girl, and really all of those adoptions were extremely closed, other than perhaps the exchange of some like medical type of information. There really was no meeting, nothing like that going on. So that would be like the totally closed end of adoption. And that still happens sometimes, once in a while, I still have a birth mom or a birth family that really is trying to maintain their privacy. And, maybe they don't want other family members to know, maybe they're embarrassed. But for whatever reason, they would choose a closed adoption. But really, we're seeing a huge trend toward openness in an adoption. And like I said, I think of it as a sliding scale, a spectrum. It's not really your adoption is open or your adoption is closed. It can really kind of be in this huge spectrum in between. I mean, Brittney just told you about her beautiful birth mom who came to Miles' baptism. We would call that an open adoption or openness in an adoption. I have cases where not only is there openness with birth mom, there's openness with birth dad, there's also openness with the birth families. So, grandmas, grandpas, aunts, uncles are kind of all participating in the openness. And in the beginning, it is a little bit of a leap of faith. You're trusting one another. But it's really awesome to watch those relationships grow and flourish. And sometimes there are little hiccups in the road. We hope we're always there to help our families, both birth families and adoptive families, through that process. But openness in an adoption can really be wonderful. I think, although I am not a mental health professional, for sure you would want to talk to Angela about that. But I think a lot of the recent literature, research in this area really points toward openness being so much healthier for the adopted child and allowing them to be adjusted to their situation and their life circumstance. So openness in an adoption can truly be beautiful. I know a lot of times prospective adoptive parents might be afraid, but I can tell you in all my years of practice, other than a couple really rare incidents, there has never been anything bad that has happened. But I think there have been a few instances where people got their feathers, ruffled and maybe postured to do something, but they were always able to work that out. So I think openness can allow a child to understand the circumstances under which they were placed for adoption, and that it doesn't mean that their birth parent or birth parents didn't love them. They just were not in a position to be able to parent them. But they can still show love and affection and interest, and even be there to explain to a child what happened when they're ready for that information.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Could you talk a little bit about families that are considering placing a child up for adoption, what that process is like, and where folks can go to get more information about that?
Sure. And I like that you said placing. So in the adoption world, we try to use the term like placing a child as opposed to giving up a child or giving away a child or putting up a child for adoption. I would say we sometimes use that language because we know that's what birth parents use and that's what they're searching for. And I'm comfortable using whatever language is comfortable within reason with birth parents. I certainly, want to support them and make them feel comfortable, but I also want them to know we don't think they're giving up. I mean, making a plan for your child is not giving up. A lot of birth families are very serious about what they're doing. They really consider the different families. First, they start off thinking about what is important to them in an adoptive family. And maybe I should back up and kind of start at the beginning. So when a birth mother or birth family contacts us, one of the first things really that would happen, they would meet with Angela, who is a licensed clinical social worker. who is adoption competent. She also has a certification in perinatal mental health. She's really well qualified to work with these moms and kind of help them explore their options. I mean, adoption is what we do, but we're also here to support women in whatever path they choose. We're not here to impose our views upon them. So one of the first things that she would do is really help them explore their different parenting options out there, or maybe not even parenting, but the options available to them as a pregnant woman. And then should they choose the path of adoption, present that to them, I would say in more detail, and find out like what's important to you. I've had birth moms say to me, you know, I really want my child to live in the country on a farm and have animals and dogs and cats and horses. And that was important to them. I've had birth moms tell me, it's really important to me that my child is placed with a Christian family. Or I just placed a child recently from a young woman who is a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and she wanted a family that could maintain that same religious upbringing with her child. So we work hard to, you know, meet those kind of requirements or requests, and really present an array of families to a birth mom or birth parent. So sometimes it's just a single mom participating, making the adoption plan, but sometimes it's a couple. It could even be a married couple. And sometimes maybe mom has a support system. She has a sister or her mom or her aunt or someone that's helping her along that path. So we'll work with them to really find out what are their needs? What are their needs? Do they need help with food, with maternity clothes, with housing, those types of things? Do they want a family who will maintain regular contact with them? Do they want a family who will send them pictures and letters? Do they want a family that will meet up with them once in a while? So we try to match families with birth moms that have similar goals and desires, although I don't think that's my job to say this should be your adoptive family. So basically what we do is, Brittany was explaining that she prepared kind of like a booklet or family profile, and we present those to the birth family for them to review, and like, hey, I really like this family, or could I know more about this family, or I'd like to talk to this family. I think I really like them. And you just never know what they're going to connect with. Mm-hmm. I've had birth moms say, oh my gosh, their dog reminds me of my dog that I grew up with, and I really want my child to be in this home with the same, you know, dog. Or look at their grandma reminds me of my grandma, and I want, you know, my child to have a grandma, the same kind of grandma that I had. Or maybe it's the, you know, they're active in their church and maybe that's important to them, or maybe their large family is important. You just don't know. Everybody has different desires.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering do you prioritize trying to locally match? Like, are you trying to keep people within the same county or state, or is it just you're matching all across the nation?
I would say pretty much all across the nation. I don't, for example, place into New York because of laws in New York, but I have adoptive parents that live all over the country. I have placed children in Alaska and Hawaii and all over. And in fact, prior to the implementation of the Hague Treaty on Intercountry Adoption, I placed children into Germany, into the Netherlands. So really, I would say it's kind of driven by what the birth mom is looking for. Some birth moms are particular that I would like a family that lives close to me, so that will help facilitate visitation. And some think the other way, like, I don't want a family that lives in my town. I don't want to run into them. I would prefer that they live in another state.
Mm.
So I would say it's really not based upon their geographical location for the most part.
Rose, let me turn it over to you. What are you thinking?
I have so many questions. I was thinking about, is there, you've talked about people having preferences on both sides, the birth parents having preferences for the adoptive family having preferences for the child, or type of child, age of child, race of child, those types of things. Is there anything in particular or additional that is done when you're doing like an interracial or adoption, or just like a cross-cultural maybe adoption for an older child who's going to a completely different, either part of the country or like type of family? Is there anything like the social work or anything they're particularly
Sure.
looking for to make sure that's a match?
Absolutely. So first of all, I would say they must have a positive home study. And in the way that we work is that birth mom, as long as she wants to select the family, it must be a family that she feels comfortable with. But those are some excellent questions. And part of your home study process, really, you should be receiving education to help you if you are looking to adopt outside of your race, if you are looking to adopt an older child, if you are looking to adopt a child that might have some type of medical issues, say related to substance abuse or Down syndrome or something, really we hope and we work toward all of those families having some specific education to help them kind of make those decisions and then prepare for those adoptions. And I think really every adoption is so unique and different. So you kind of start, with a wide funnel and come down. You start with the very broad adoption topics and subjects in your education, and then can kind of really focus on, for example, if you're adopting a child of a race other than yours, what are the things you can do to help your child feel comfortable? What are the books you can read? What are the websites you can go to? What are the podcasts you can listen to? And I would say in today's world, there are so many resources out there for you, when even maybe 10 years ago, they weren't there. But now there is just a huge amount of resources available to families to help them. Things like the National Council on Adoptable Children, they have wonderful conferences that are not just for adoption professionals. I just saw they're having a half-day seminar on, I think it's on alcohol exposure and children and the impact, like fetal alcohol syndrome and those types of things. So there are a lot of resources to gain information nowadays.
And can Brittney maybe talk about your experience with having adopting a child outside of your race, and anything that you've done or felt like you need to do to support him that you would not do with the birth child or do differently with the natural?
I read a lot of books. I belong to a lot of Facebook groups, Instagram groups. Angela, her son is also Black, so I have her for support. I think racial mirrors are very important. You want, you don't want your child to lose part of themselves, part of their identity. My brother-in-law is Black. My niece and nephew are biracial. Got my brother-in-law's whole family who's part of our family. So Miles is able to grow up with a Black man, grow up with, nieces and nephews that don't, not look like him. They look very similar. And so he's able to see himself in other people. I know that I had to learn a lot about hair and skin because it's totally different. Keisha's been help. I mean, I'm always like, is this a good brush? The one I'm using is too soft, and they send me links. I think a big part, you can't have an ego with this. You have to be willing to, ask people for help. I mean, I'm white. I Kia and I don't have the same hair. I wouldn't be able to do her hair. I would need to learn. And I think that's a big thing. You have to be able to ask for help and not have an ego thinking that you know the best because it's your child. And it is, like, I love him, but I don't always know what's best when it comes to his hair, his skin, stuff like that. And I have to ask for help, and I do, and I get great products, and his hair and skin look great.
Yes.
Brittany is the ultimate researcher.
Yeah.
Everything. So
Yes.
I didn't want to take it.
Kia's husband doesn't like me to send her emails anymore because she starts buying stuff.
And Amazon is like, it's nothing but boxes of Amazon.
Thank goodness for Amazon.
Right?
I love it. I love it. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the legal process of adoption.
Sure.
So I understand maybe y'all make an agreement, the birth parents and the adoptive parents make an agreement, hey, we want to adopt the child, but then that doesn't get set in stone until later, right?
Mm.
That's right. So basically, there's nothing that a woman can do before the birth of her child that obligates her to place her child for adoption. So she can make a plan for adoption, but it's really not until after birth, and typically after that 48-hour waiting period, where a mom is going to sign the actual legal document. And technically the child is placed with me, and then I place the child with the adoptive family. I'm not necessarily taking baby home, even though I love them, but the legal custody kind of goes that way. I'm an intermediary. So the legal custody comes to me, and then I transfer it to the adoptive family. I did get to spend about 4 or 5 hours with a precious little baby boy a couple weeks ago with Angela while we waited for the family. They were driving as fast as they could, but it was great. In that legal process, basically, while in adoption, I mean, I get a phone call from a woman, every once in a while. What just happened recently, a woman that's at the hospital that says, I just gave birth. I want to place my baby for adoption. So we can kind of work really fast and get that done. We prefer to have time up front to make sure they have proper counseling. They have time to consider their alternatives, to make a plan that works for them and maybe their partner. And also sometimes to develop a relationship with the adoptive family. That's always nice. But you're right, the actual, what I'll call binding legal documents are not signed until after the baby's born. So a birth mom at any time up until the point of signing those papers can change her mind and not place a child for adoption. But once that 48-hour period has passed, or she's received a medical discharge, she can sign what we call the consent for adoption, the actual legal binding document that transfers custody of the child to me. Once that takes place, typically then baby is discharged from the hospital directly to the adoptive family. A lot of times people think this involves foster care, that private adoption means that a baby's going to go to foster care. It doesn't. In all my years, in hundreds of placements, I've never had one of my, I call them all my babies, placed into foster care. So there's a direct placement. And that's usually what most of our birth moms want. They want to know their child's not going into the foster care system. Their child's going home with an adoptive family that they've picked out. And then there is a continuation of the legal process. The first part would be what's called a termination of parental rights hearing. And then the second part would be the actual finalization of the adoption when the adoptive parents become the legal parents of the child. And in Florida, that can occur no sooner than 90 days after placement. So typically, if we're talking newborn adoption, that's typically in baby's 4th month.
Why is there that 90-day waiting period?
So in that period, there is something called post-placement supervision going on. It's typically by the home study provider. They're making a couple visits to the adoptive family and just making sure that everything is going okay. I have to say, I've never had a bad situation where it wasn't going okay, but just in case there was something to come up, those reports, they're actually written reports that are filed with the court, and the judge reviews those prior to the finalization of the adoption. So it gives the court some assurance that this child is doing well, that this family is adjusting. It doesn't mean there won't be issues in the future. I mean, I have young adult children. There are still issues, and they're my biological children, but you know, I mean, stuff happens when you have kids, but the court just wants to know, like, everybody's on the right path here. They're headed in the right direction. So that's, I think, why we have that 90-day waiting period. And that's not a change your mind period. I know I get a lot of adoptive parents that is their number one fear, that someone is going to come and take their child back. I've never had a child, I'm almost always afraid to say that, but I've never had a child removed from a placement. But it just is an opportunity for the court to have assurances that that child is doing well in that placement.
That makes sense to me. I also had 2 kids, and I'm thinking about those newborn days, and you're thinking of someone coming into your home and you're sleep deprived.
Or I didn't think I was going to be without the nurse for this long. So can we go get her back or something?
Yes.
Is that not being able to make any binding decisions prior to giving birth? Is that the same for surrogacy situations, or do you deal with any surrogacy in your
I can't really say that I deal with much in the area of surrogacy. However, it depends what type of surrogacy, but typically when you're talking like a surrogacy where a surrogate is carrying a child that is not related to the surrogate, so there's a donor egg and sperm from a donor or from a commissioning parent, then that child, although they're carrying the child, that child is genetically often related to at least one of the members of the commissioning couple. And there's typically a court order in place, often before baby's even born, recognizing that once the DNA testing comes back and tells us, yes, that child is not the genetic child of the surrogate, then these intended parents or commissioning couple become the legal parents of the child.
That's interesting.
And that's a whole nother area.
I was just thinking of like a case I read about in law school. There was something, it was one of those like patriarchal, a woman can't make this decision until she sees her baby, and kind of things.
Yes,
go ahead.
We have that somewhat still in Florida. I mean, so in Florida law, a man can sign a consent for adoption anytime after the child is born. But it's probably been, I can't keep track, but it's probably been 15 years in Florida that we've had a 48-hour waiting period. And sometimes I think it's arbitrary. So there are cases where I wait more than 48 hours. But we kind of go with what is the birth mom comfortable with, how are they doing. Maybe they've had a C-section and they're hooked up to a morphine pump. Well, I'm not going to go in and take a consent for adoption in that type of situation. The only 2 grounds you can overturn a consent in Florida are for fraud or duress. So we always want to ensure that we're not wrongfully inducing someone. We're not going to go like, here, sign this paper and we're going to give you this money, or if you do this, we're going to do that. That's not how it works. We want that to be, a decision that a parent makes knowingly.
Mm-hmm.
Brittany, I know we have you on as a guest of the show, but do you have any questions for Madonna?
She's my attorney.
I know.
I've asked her all of the questions.
I wasn't going to say it.
And she was awesome. It was a great experience.
That's wonderful.
Awesome.
I have some questions about international adoption. And I know, Madonna, you were talking about how you had placed some children before. I think you said, was it the Hague Treaty?
Yes, so there is an international Hague Treaty on inter-country adoption that, man, I'm going to say it's been in effect more than 10 years now. I'm not good with remembering dates. That impacts children being placed outside of the United States or children. And traditionally what we hear of is children coming into the United States. I remember one of the first times I was placing a child, I can't remember if it was Germany or the Netherlands, but the judge just looked at me and said, "You can't do that." And I was like, "Well, why can't I do that, Your Honor?" You know, and I mean, it was a very friendly conversation and I was explaining the law, but he just had this notion like, well, there must be a prohibition somewhere that you're not allowed to bring a child from the United States to another country for adoption.
Good
Oh
American.
no, you're only a, yes,
Awesome.
right. But it's okay for Americans to go to other countries and bring children here. And I said, well, you know, it works both ways, Your Honor. And we have, I will say, I'm not a huge fan of the Hague Treaty. I am a fan of the purpose of the Hague Treaty to protect children. So that is something I always believe in. I just think the way sometimes they have gone about it may not be the best. But currently, to either place a child in another country or bring a child into this country, your adoption professional must be Hague certified or work with a Hague certified professional. And becoming Hague certified is extremely expensive. It is quite an elaborate process, but it really, it's for the intent. I mean, the intent of it is to protect children. I think they just went a little overboard in what they did. And, you know, we're seeing different, you know, really some different things going on in international adoption. Some countries are really pulling back and tightening up, and they don't like the perception that the children of their country might need help. And some of these countries, they do need help. They are not able to adequately care for their children. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but when you have hundreds of children in an orphanage with, you know, just a small handful of staff to care for these children, they can't possibly receive individualized attention that we want children to receive. We want them to be held and cuddled and loved and have nutritious food, and for someone to hold them and feed them with the bottle as opposed to propping them up on a pillow with some way of propping up a bottle. So I think there are reasons why international adoption can be good. To be honest, years ago, children being placed outside of the United States, so from the US to other countries, were often minority children. We've seen a huge shift in the acceptance of families adopting minority children. And I can tell you 20 years ago, if I was trying to find a family to adopt Miles, I might have a real struggle. African-American baby boys, it was a huge struggle. And I have to tell you, I keep in touch with some of my international families. And so now I have children, you know, in the Netherlands and Germany who are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. And I've even had some of them come to visit, which was just a really awesome experience. And I mean, in both Germany and in the Netherlands, there are a lot of racially mixed families, and it seems to me that it's more acceptable, or maybe 10 or 15 years ago was more acceptable. I think in today's world, hopefully we've made progress and we will continue to make this progress. But I think there are some other countries who have been some steps ahead of us there.
That's with a lot of stuff.
Amen.
I said it too loud.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, kind of switching the narrative, but kind of keeping it on the same playing field. I know that, or just doing some research, that a lot of children that, get adopted, whether it's even the adoptive parents or the parents that are gifting them, this good life, that they can go through some psychological effects. It sounds as though that you haven't really dealt with that, but have you heard of any cases? And then Brittney, did you go through anything, or it sounds like it was such a great transition, but this is also something that is definitely reported that, kids and parents go through this type of, these type of psychological effects, struggles with self-esteem and dealing with other things. Do you guys have any, examples of that, and how did you deal with it?
I think you go first.
Oh, great. I was going to say that I've been doing this long enough that I call them all my children. I have children who are now young adults. I have children who have children of their own. There are children I've placed who I might get a Christmas card, with their picture once a year, but I don't have much contact. And then I have children that I have a lot of contact with. And this is my personal opinion. I am not a trained mental health professional. That would be a good topic for an Angela to discuss. But I think with the added openness in adoption, you can give children a lot more of their story. So instead of a child just being told, and the other thing, even just being told you're adopted. So when I was growing up, I think adoption was often a big secret. Children weren't even told they were adopted. And in today's world, if an adoptive parent said to me, I'm not going to tell my child they're adopted, I'm not sure I would continue working with them. Really, what I would do would probably have Angela work with them and present to them. There is, scientific information, studies out there that show that children that have like a better understanding of what happened are able to cope with things better, as opposed to just, I'm adopted. Okay, what does that mean? Where did I come from? Did my birth mom didn't want me, so she gave me away? No, this is your story. And like in Brittney's case, I really wonder, like, Miles may never even go through that kind of struggle, because he's going to know, and he does to some extent. I don't know, what a little person like that can understand right now, but he's going to understand, I'm adopted. This is the mom. Maybe he doesn't understand birth mom or biological mom, but I grew in her tummy, and she didn't discard me. She loved me so much that she picked my parents for me. And I think when there is at least some level of openness, that children have a better understanding, and that can help them. But certainly I think there are children that have questions, that maybe go through, periods like, I don't look like anybody in my family. Why don't I look like anybody in my family? Mommy, why is my skin brown? Although I also have some little ones who I'm not sure that they quite comprehend yet that, they must know that their skin is not the same color as their mom or dad's, but they don't understand the significance of that yet.
I was basically going to say the same thing that Madonna has said about the openness. When we were going through this, Angela and I talked, and all of the research just really supports openness and adoption for the welfare of the child, because so many of them can have abandonment issues, and maintaining this openness, like Miles will always know that, you know, his birth mother, this was a decision made out of love. She wanted so much more than she could provide. And when we talked about it when we were in the hospital, she said, you know, I never wanted to have to tell my child no because of money. And right now it would be nothing but no's. And I mean, like, he'll always know it was, she loved him so much that she made this decision. If he has questions, he'll be able to talk to her. Like, medical histories where we're in the doctor's office when he had the milk protein allergy. I was able to text and say, hey, did you have this when you were little? And she's like, oh, let me talk to my mom. And she did. So, I mean, the openness is really good for that too. Like, he's got a medical history. She has our, like, ancestry.com login and is doing his entire family tree for him.
That's cool.
Wow.
His mom, or her mom, is also going to be invited to his dance recital. So I think openness is very important to reduce any issues that could develop over time.
Awesome.
Brittany, I think I should have you present sometime on openness and an adoption. And I think
Totally.
a lot of times new adoptive parents or people contemplating adoption are afraid. And a lot of times you're afraid of the unknown. And if you can kind of work past that a little bit and understand, and, you know, not all birth moms are, you know, the Cinderella story. I mean, I have placed children who were conceived in rape. I have all kinds of situations, but their birth mom loved them enough to take care of them and to make this plan for them. And so we try, even when a birth mom doesn't want openness, I suggest, don't always get, but I really love it when they're willing to at least write a letter. And I urge adoptive parents, like, put this in his baby book, or put it up with where you keep baby items or something, so that one day when he's old enough to understand, he could read this letter, or at least you know something of your birth mom's story and you can relay that. But I think there are children who, even with that information, are going to struggle. I mean, we have children who are biological, who are raised by their biological parents, who struggle with issues. So times are not easy for everyone and people struggle. I would urge you, if you have a child that's adopted, to find an adoption competent counselor that works with children or young people your child's age. For example, Angela in my office is what we call adoption competent. I don't necessarily like that term, but it's a training program through the state to become adoption competent. But find someone with some experience in helping children with these issues. And I think we're really learning so much more and becoming more aware and promoting openness in an adoption and urging birth parents to, you know, share their story or share at least part of their story with a child or with the family, so that they can share it with the child.
That's great. Well, I can't believe it, but we are closing at 5:30. We've got about 5 minutes. So I wanted to give everybody a last round for comments and questions. I'll throw it first to Brittany.
I'm sorry, what? Carrie was texting me.
Carrie's like, work. I was going to throw it to you for last comments and questions.
I mean, I just think adoption is a wonderful thing. If you're in a position where you can, you know, give a child a loving home, I think it's great. And I would say keep it open if you can.
Very cool. What about you, Kia?
I think, one, Brittany, thank you for doing such an amazing job and gifting, you know, Miles such a good life because like you stated earlier, you know, this was not an easy decision for her and she did not want to say no. And I think you are doing an amazing job with making sure that it is open for them to come in. So I thank you for that. And you always remember that, you know, he needs to see himself out there. So you all are doing that. And you asked the amazing questions as well. So I thank you for that, because I know he's going to turn into an amazing young man when he gets older. There's really no more to say, but thank you. And I think that a lot of other parents that are thinking about adopting, because I even have a friend in Jacksonville that she thought about it and thought about it and thought about it and finally did it. She did the teenager route. So that was even harder. And then it was a girl teenager at that. So that was even hard, but it was an amazing trip for her. And I think like Madonna stated, you have to keep telling your story, because that we have so many kids that can be afforded these or gifted these good lives and still have that open relationship, and it's okay.
Absolutely. What about you, Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Madonna and Brittany for being here, because, you know, I didn't steer towards these types of classes in law school, but the only thing I knew about adoption from law school was like estates and trusts. It's like terminate, new family. This is your intestine. Here's what you get from you don't get shit from your birth parents. You get from your adoptive parents. But so this was enlightening in many ways. And on openness, I just wanted to say that, you know, with 23andMe out there, you're not going to keep your secrets anyway. So might as well do what's best for the child. So
not happening.
Oh, wow. Well, Madonna, thank you so much for being on. Do you have any last closing remarks for us?
I would just say, you know, if you're considering adoption, consider adoption from foster care. That might not be the right thing for everyone, but go look at Heart Gallery of the Big Bend or something like that. And there are beautiful, lovely children out there really in need of homes. If you can't give a permanent home and you can give a temporary home, you could be a foster parent. Those are some real angels out there doing that kind of work. If you are a pregnant woman and you're not ready to parent and you're either it's an unexpected, unplanned, or unwanted pregnancy, there are other options available to you. And I would say adoption is a loving option. It does not cost you money to place a child for adoption. Your child's not going to foster care. Look at Brittany. There are beautiful adoptive parents out there waiting to adopt. So those would be my parting thoughts. And thank you for having me. It was lovely to see Brittany. I haven't seen her for a while in person, and lovely to meet you ladies.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful, and happy National Adoption Month.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madonna.
Woohoo!
Thanks. Bye, y'all.